Hey there everybody, coming at you today with an infield review and comparison of two blades. This is the ESEE6 and the Schrade SCHF52M. And so the reason why I chose to compare these two particular knives is because I feel like they're both in the exact same blade class, right around the 6-inch camp knife or survival knife blade size. Similar features, same steel. And so in my opinion, it's a real good comparison to look at both a mid-priced survival knife and a budget survival knife. Now this comparison isn't going to be perfect. If you take a look at the edge of my ESEE6, I mean it's not perfect, and at the same time it's not a factory edge. I've somewhat convexed it over time through stropping and through sharpening on whetstones, where on the Schrade, this is a brand new, never been used factory edge. So this test isn't perfect, but it is just a comparison and just a way to have a little bit of fun today. Just taking a real quick look at that factory Schrade edge. Looks like it has a real nice grind, very even, and seems to be right out of the box pretty sharp. Feels to be pretty good right off the get-go. Let's see if it can shave. So in terms of shaving sharp, it's definitely not popping any hairs. I mean, it's kind of dragging hairs off my hand, but it's not really shaving. So I mean, the factory edge is good, but certainly not shaving sharp. And the ESEE, which I do my best to maintain, honestly kind of feels just about the same. So I think I'm starting with very similar relative sharpness on both these blades. Now in terms of materials and size and shape, I mean, you can see here that there is a slight difference in terms of the actual blade length. The ESEE is a full flat grind, whereas the Schrade is a saber grind. I don't know if there's any sort of hollow grind to that. It feels like it might be slightly hollow ground. Both of them have a drop point design, finger choils, micarta handle scales. A big difference between the two ends up being that the ESEE is like a 3/16, where the SCHF52M is a little bit closer to a 1/4 inch. I think it's 0.22 inches or something like that. So you get a little more heft, a little more blade length, and a little more weight behind the Schrade. But anyhow, that's kind of really the biggest difference between these two blades. Now in terms of the carry system, I have these set up very similar. Both of them have a nylon sheath. The ESEE has the original plastic sheath also included, but both of them have a very similar system, have a pocket to carry some extra accessories, and so I feel like in that regard, even though the ESEE sheath is considerably nicer, at least they're both set up kind of the same. Now I'm going to start here just with some stabbing tasks. Here's the ESEE6. Some nice deep penetration into this piece of wood. I mean, if you look at how much of that's getting buried, I'd say almost close to 1 inch. Nice quality purchase. My hand feels nice and secure. No worries of my hand running down the blade. Now with the Schrade, now the very first thing I can tell you, I mean, I am getting slightly less penetration. I think that's partly due to the thickness of the spine, so it's not penetrating into the wood. And I can tell you already, this rough micarta actually hurts my hands. It is quite rough, but let me keep going at it for a minute here. it is quite rough. In fact, I don't know if you can see that. Let's see if I can reposition here a little bit. Might be hard for you to see, but it's actually leaving lines on my fingers. So in that regard, that's kind of too bad. I'm not really happy. I mean, the ESEE doesn't do that to me at all. Feels just solid. Now, if you look here at the penetrations that you get from the ESEE, you can see where the tip's gone in. This is the difference. Look at the tip from the Schrade. I mean, just big, wide stabbing penetrations. Not as deep, but significantly wider. All right, I guess I don't really know what advantage that is, but maybe for tactical reasons that might make a difference. But for general camp tasks, I mean, probably not a big deal, but you can see the difference just from the thickness in that blade stock. Okay, so let's get into some chopping here. This is the Schrade. Just feeling it out, hitting on the edge. Controlled chopping. Just trying to dig into the edge of this wood here. I mean, if you look at that, nice deep penetration there. I mean, totally burying that knife. Now I do feel a little bit of a hot spot where my finger is hooking on the back of this handle. Nothing that's really bothering me too much, but definitely worth noting. Yeah, I feel it right back in there. I mean, that's partly because you have that hook giving you real good quality grip on the knife, but at the same time, you know, I am feeling it right in that finger every time I hit. Now with the ESEE, I definitely don't feel as confident in my grip. The handle gets real thin here and tapers out, so I need to use this lanyard with my pinky even to get as far back as I am on that Schrade. So let's see how we do. Wow. I mean, even at that, burying this thing nice and deep, real firm. Look at that. I mean, that thing's pretty well buried there. So, I mean, bam. I mean, even though this blade is thinner, it's not as heavy. You know, it's a different grind. I don't have as much handle length. At the same time, definitely still chopping nice and deep into this wood. Look at that. Just another example of how deep that really bit into that wood. I mean, I buried the handle all the way down and pretty much got that blade as deep as I could there. So anyway, that's just a chopping comparison between the ESEE and the SCHF52M. So let's try some batoning tasks here. Here I have the Schrade. Let's get this thing set up here. Nice split right there. Not too difficult, pretty easy. If you can look, it's really wedging down through the wood, splitting up quite a gap here at the top and getting us a nice crack forming down through the wood. Bam, no problem. Oh, check this out. Already broke the tip right off. You gotta be kidding me. There you go. Thank you, Schrade. Broke the tip right off of that knife with just some simple batoning. I mean, you've seen 100% of the use that I've given this knife. 100% of the use so far. You've seen it. I mean, what did I use this thing for, like 2 minutes? And it already broke. That's weak. Weak. So we already know Schrade can't hang at this party. What about the ESEE? Well, I've used this for years now, and I know the Schrade can hang. Right down through the wood. I mean, I'm not even wailing on this. I don't even have to. It just goes right down and through. No problem. So I mean, as you can see, even the ESEE, even though it's not quite as thick as the Schrade, still opening up. Pretty nice gap, splitting the wood down and through. You don't see any broken tip on this bad boy. All right, so let's do this. And this wood here has been batoned into, I don't know, 1/2 inch to a 1 inch thick piece of wood here. Let's just use the ESEE to stab right down through this and split it out even further. And we'll do the same with the Schrade, even though I'm already missing that tip. So the first thing is, obviously at this point, this thing won't even stab into the wood. There we go. Kind of just blasts its way through, I guess. There we go. I mean, not perfect, but it worked. All right, so let's just blow through these. This thing's kind of struggling a little bit. There we go. That was the Schrade. Let's try the ESEE. A little bit cleaner. Not perfect, but a little bit cleaner, like I said. Oops, bad one there. Now I'm just going to stop for a second and talk about kind of how unfortunate this is for the Schrade. I mean, I'll tell you, just on that light chopping task there, trying to get down through those pieces of wood, I mean, I feel so confident in this Schrade, in my grip, and this handle shape is great. If it wasn't for the aggressiveness of these handle scales, I think the ergonomics would be just about perfect. I mean, the handle size is great, the length. I love that little hook. I mean, I definitely actually feel more confident in that than I do with the ESEE. You know, I guess I never realized it at the time, but even with all the use I've given this ESEE, just how kind of sketchy it seems wrapping my finger on that lanyard and relying on that to hold the knife. But this, to me, is a great design. I mean, I really like the way that feels, and it really hooks my pinky finger and gives me a perfect grip, even with the aggressiveness, like I said, of these scales. So anyway, I mean, there are definitely some points to be had for this Schrade, but man, I mean, that tip is just gonna kill this thing, in my opinion. That just makes this blade absolutely useless, because if you can't do this basic stuff and you can't trust that blade, man, I mean, why would you even buy the knife? I mean, even if it is only 40 bucks, I'd rather spend 140 bucks or whatever, you know, and at least have something I can trust. So anyway, that's a a big letdown here for that Schrade. So as I continue this, I want to try a little bit of like cross batoning just to see what happens. And I mean, who knows how this thing's gonna behave. So anyway, here's the Schrade. Just enough to get some really good wraps on it. In terms of the edge, this still seems to be in pretty good shape. I mean, I don't see anything that looks rolled out on me. The one thing I am noticing, now that I'm looking closer, and I don't think the camera will be able to pick that up, is that this grind is so offset. I mean, it's just super offset to that side. So, I mean, when you look at how it was ground, it wasn't ground even down the whole blade. Once you get up into this belly area, I mean, it is like super offset to one side, almost straight down this way, with your secondary bevel being entirely on this side. So you're not going to see that, but it just shows the overall attention to detail. So anyway, that's the Schrade. And now the same work with the ESEE. So I tried to do just about the same amount of work here, show similar results. I mean, this edge is super tough. I mean, no additional marks over what I might have already had. You know, I can see a couple tiny little microscopic dings, but I know those have been there. It's something I've actually been trying to work out of this blade. So those already existed, but you know, certainly no damage. The spine's fine. Nothing to worry about with the ESEE. All right, so how about some carving tasks? Here we have the ESEE, just kind of shaving off some little curls here. Maybe go a little more aggressive and whittle this thing down. Oops. I mean, you can almost hear when a blade carves nice, just how it sounds. Nice bite. I mean, definitely throwing some nice chunks of wood, making some nice curls. Comfortable, no hot spots. That's the ESEE. And now for the Schrade. Just making some nice curls. It's definitely a different grind geometry from the ESEE. You know, I feel like I actually need to turn the knife over just a little bit more to find the edge. That could be the difference between the factory grind and the fact that I kind of convexed my ESEE. But at the same time, definitely getting some nice curls on this wood. Let's try carving this out a little bit. I mean, it's not getting nearly the same depth on my cut. The blade is, I'd say, glancing past the wood a little bit more. I mean, I don't know if this is even something you can really see all that well, but I have to use a lot more effort than with this ESEE. Yeah, I mean, that ESEE is just slicing nicely through the wood, but the Schrade is just, look at that same motion. It's like sliding. Very interesting. Let's try this. So I'll scrape off that bark and try to whittle that down a little bit. Again, back to the ESEE. Oh yeah, I mean, look, you can see the difference. I mean, the ESEE is just hogging the wood, and the Schrade is kind of glancing by. So not great in the carving department, that's for sure. Now, just to continue on with this conversation, I know the ESEE, when it comes from the factory, first off, it's coated. I've stripped mine. Second of all, it does not have a sharp 90-degree spine. So I added a little spot here where I filed it down. I actually used a Dremel so that I could spark a fire steel. And so here I have a ferro rod. I'm going to strip some of that coating off. And there we go. So I do have spots on this blade where if I have to, it's not perfect. In fact, I should sharpen it some more, but I can definitely shower some sparks. So it's not perfect, like I said, but it will work. With the Schrade, I have no idea if this is going to work. It feels like the spine's probably sharp enough, and the knife actually came with a fire steel. Granted, it did also come with a striker, but will a knife do it? Yes. Yes, it will. And actually, pretty nice. So, in that regard, pretty good points for the Schrade. Well, so I don't know if there's too much more for me to go through. I mean, I would continue to go, but my mind's already made up. I mean, if this Schrade tip didn't break, I'd probably be sitting here debating whether or not this is worth the investment. But at this point, I have to be honest. With just the real basic stuff you saw me doing, I honestly can't say I'd recommend this, because the last thing you want to do is be relying on this tool either on camp tasks, and especially for survival. So in that regard, this thing's pretty much straight out the window. And you all know how I feel about the ESEE. This thing always performs. I've never had a problem. No matter what I've put it through, it's been fine. So anyway, at least you got to see for yourself a little side-by-side comparison of these two camp knives. All right, so there you have it, guys. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.